As Russia turns to the United States, support for Europe must begin. It is uncertain how long this video will exist, but it is hoped to inspire. The United States and Russia are indeed very close. They seem inseparable. A peace agreement is nearing completion, essentially selling out Ukraine. At this time, strategic dialogue with Europe has been restarted. Now the EU aims to revive the China-Europe Investment Agreement. The East is not returning. This indicates that the East may abandon Russia and choose to support Europe. Many are confused about who poses the real long-term threat to the East. Some say it's the US. Others say Japan. And some say India. But history shows the undeniable fact. When there is no threat, Russia is the greatest threat. In 1949, Stalin sent a telegram to the leader, requesting joint governance. The leader refused. After the success of the Crossing the River campaign, the Soviets surprisingly fled to Guangzhou. The Americans remained, historically, the only one to seriously consider a nuclear strike on the East was the Soviets. Massive investments were made in the Third Front construction, relocating factories to remote areas. This led to low production efficiency and technological lag, severely hampering economic development. Even after the Soviet collapse, weapons sold to India and Vietnam were more advanced than those sold to the East. The goal was to suppress the East's power. Now, Russia's strategic space is shrinking due to the war in Ukraine. After 3 years of conflict, the economy is devastated. Russia urgently needs a victory. After the gambling king took office, the two factions merged. They aim to replicate the post-World War II negotiations, redefining the balance of power. The focus is Europe. Currently, Russia's ability to contend is largely dependent on bilateral trade with the East. In 2024, Russia's exports are projected to reach $278 billion, with over $100 billion going to the East. The East accounts for nearly half. For imports, Russia relies heavily on the East. In 2024, Russia's trade surplus is projected to be $150.9 billion, with imports totaling just over $200 billion. Exports to Russia from the East are expected to be $115.4 billion. Comparing these figures, it is clear that without the East, Russia would struggle to procure anything. However, it is important not to forget the past aggressor, the neighbor that occupied over 1.5 million square kilometers of territory. For the East, the goal is to maintain a nearly lifeless bear, rather than a fully revitalized one. The bear cannot fall, but it also cannot rise. It must help constrain the US, but not become strong enough to threaten the East. He is clever, but also a dangerous figure. Let's not forget, he has attempted to join NATO 4 times. What would happen if he succeeded? The entire northern East would be exposed to NATO's firepower. Would they still be able to rely on the US dollar? Even Russian experts have openly admitted that the East is neither their ally nor their friend, but merely a temporary partner. Can such a relationship be trusted? All of this our ancestors understood long ago, over 2,000 years ago, during the Warring States period. Why did Qin rise among the 6 states? To ultimately unify the world? An important reason was Qin's strategy of forming distant alliances while attacking nearby states. When the 5 states initiated conflict, Qin did send troops, but firmly opposed dividing the Qi state. Why? Because the Qi state did not border Qin. Dividing Qi offered no direct benefits to Qin. Instead, it would strengthen the powers of Zhao, Wei, and Chu, which border Qin. Indeed, after Qin was weakened, Zhao quickly rose, becoming a major obstacle to Qin's unification. History proves Qin's strategic vision was correct. At that time, it was just as it is now. The East is thousands of miles away from Europe. If Europe were to be divided or controlled, the primary beneficiaries would inevitably be the US and Russia. The US would gain access to Europe's advanced technology, financial capital, and talent. Russia would then annex Eastern Europe, reshaping the strategic landscape of the former Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the East would at most gain a few cheap assets discarded by Europe, receiving little benefit overall. Worse still, if Russia devours this European pie, it will inevitably push into Central Asia and then rush to the Far East. At that point, the East would again face pressure from a strong northern rival, having to station millions of troops at the border, repeating history. Thus, the East and Europe are actually strategic partners against Russia. Though we are thousands of miles apart, there are no direct territorial disputes. Our economies complement each other. The East needs Europe's advanced technology and brands, and in gaining access to the European market, Europe can equally access the market of 1.4 billion in the East. Both face strategic pressure from the US and Russia, and both seek strategic autonomy. Yet the Europeans are too arrogant, thinking their civilization is superior. The hard-earned investment agreement from the East was halted by the EU for 4 years, costing the East significant orders. Europe then turned around and joined the US in sanctions against our industries, faced with the potential for a US-Russian alliance to divide Europe. How should the East respond? First, strategically, it must support Europe. Maintain independence. Regardless of whether Europe is controlled by the US or annexed by Russia, it's extremely unfavorable for the East. If it leans towards the US, it will become a frontline position for US containment. If Europe is controlled by Russia, Russia will become strong enough to threaten the East. However, tactically, the East should not unconditionally follow, as the power dynamic has shifted. Now, Europe needs the East, not the other way around. Europe must drop its arrogance and show sincerity. In terms of market openness, technology cooperation, and international respect, Europe must provide substantial returns to the East. The statement that the East does not need the continent is a wake-up call for Europe. Only when Europe realizes the strategic value of the East will it truly respect the East's core interests. Secondly, the East should continue to control its support for Russia. It should neither let Russia fail completely in Ukraine, nor allow it to win decisively. There are no eternal enemies in international relations, only eternal interests. Abandoning Russia and supporting Ukraine is currently the best option. If Europe can maintain independence with the East's support, the world will form a relatively balanced multipolar structure. If Europe is divided by the US and Russia, the world may revert to a Cold War confrontation. The East will face greater strategic pressure. However, the East must also prepare for the worst. It should guard against a US-Russia alliance dividing Europe, and be wary of European arrogance and betrayal. At the same time, it should turn its attention to Australia as a strategic pivot. Prepare for the worst-case scenario. This land in the southern hemisphere possesses almost all the strategic resources the East urgently needs. It has oil, minerals, soil, and coal. Moreover, Australia can theoretically support 900 million people. But currently, it has developed only about 18% of its arable land. The agricultural products it exports alone can sustain 60 million people. But Australia itself has only about 25 million people. As the saying goes, the world is not ruled by one person. It belongs to all. As the saying goes, the East has the trade routes of the Eurasian continent. Australia is our best strategic pivot. As the saying goes, those who do not plan for the future cannot plan for the present. Those who do not plan for the big picture cannot plan for one region. Without foresight, there will be immediate trouble. Stay tuned for updates. Strategic complexities abound. Let me help clarify.